I only said 2 words. "It's mine," and the crack echoed under the chandelier. 280 guests held their breath. One phone flashed a red light, and my entire life changed course. The next morning, I woke with bandages on my head, and the clip had hit 5 million views. After that, they could no longer write my story for me. My name is Quinn Reyes. I stood near the service entrance of the grand ballroom at the Summit Crown. A position I always favored. It was close to the exit, and you could observe the entire ecosystem of the room without being swept into its current. The air in Arbortown was supposed to be thin and crisp, high-altitude Colorado purity, but in here, it was thick. The Summit Crown's ballroom was suffocating in luxury, a cavern of shimmering crystal and heavy draperies. The scent was overpowering thousands of wild mountain flowers, trucked in and arranged to look effortless, mingling with the yeasty tang of vintage champagne and the faint, sweet rot of perfume. I held a glass of water. The ice long melted, the crystal chandeliers, each one the price of a mid-sized car, threw fractured light onto the polished stone floor. As an interior designer, I knew this room was technically flawless. It was also a beautiful, expensive lie. The room, and the 280 guests within it, revolved around a single point of light. My sister, Olivia Hart. She was radiant, her beauty almost aggressive in its perfection. Her white silk dress wasn't just worn, it was inhabited, clinging to her like a second, more perfect skin. She laughed, a sound cultivated to be both musical and infectious, and the circle of admirers around her tightened, drawn in by her gravity. She was the center of everything. She always had been. I watched, feeling the familiar role settle over me like an old coat. I was the quiet one, the functional one, the one who knew how to fix things. I was the shadow that made her brightness possible. Then, the sound came. Ting, ting, ting. Gregory Hart, my father, tapped his champagne flute with a silver spoon. The music, a string quartet playing something light and forgettable, stuttered and stopped. The chatter of 280 voices faded into an expectant hush. The atmosphere didn't just quiet, it seized, tightening with a tension only I seemed to recognize. He stood near the towering, 7-tiered cake, immaculate in his custom tuxedo. He beamed, the picture of paternal pride. But I wasn't looking at his smile. I was smelling the air. The scent of high-end bourbon rolled off him in waves, cutting through the flowers and champagne. It was a familiar warning, the scent of a gathering storm. To everyone else, he was the charming, powerful patriarch. To me, that smell was a precursor to breakage, to slammed doors and quiet tears swallowed in the dark. "Welcome," he boomed, his voice filling the cavernous room. "Welcome, friends, family, and to my new son-in-law, Ethan. We are so blessed to have you join the Hart family." Polite applause. Ethan, looking handsome and slightly overwhelmed, raised his glass beside Olivia. "My daughter, Olivia," Gregory continued, his voice softening with practiced emotion, "has always been a light, a joy to us all, and on this, the most important day of her life, her mother and I wanted to give her something truly special, a foundation for the incredible life she and Ethan will build together." The room held its breath. Guests leaned in. I saw phones being raised, their lenses hungry. "We are thrilled," my father declared, spreading his arms wide, "to announce our gift to the happy couple, the house on Juniper Avenue." The air left my body. It wasn't a gasp. It was a silent vacuum, the room tilting, the lights blurring into streaks. The house on Juniper Avenue. My house. The house I had found as a collapsed ruin. The house I had poured my savings and my blood into for 3 solid years. The house whose every beam, every new wire, every painstakingly restored piece of flooring I knew by heart. The room erupted. Cheers, whistles, and a wave of thunderous applause. "Oh, how wonderful," a woman near me whispered to her husband. "Gregory is so generous," another replied. A cousin I hadn't seen in years caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up. Wow, Quinn, that's incredibly generous of you. Someone else whistled. More phones came up, turning to capture Olivia's feigned, tearful surprise. They all assumed I was in on it, that the quiet older sister, had finally done something noteworthy given my masterpiece away. I felt the stone wall cold against my back. I looked at my father, beaming as he accepted the applause for his magnificent, impossible lie. I looked at Olivia, who was already crying beautiful, photogenic tears, accepting congratulations for a prize she had not earned. Something inside me, a piece of wiring that had been frayed and sparking for decades, finally snapped. I pushed off the wall. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I simply began to walk, my heels, low and practical, clicked on the stone floor. The sound was sharp, rhythmic, cutting through the applause. Click, click, click. The crowd parted for me. The applause died down as faces turned, registering the confusion. This was not in the program. I was not part of the show. I stopped a few feet from the bridal table, directly in front of my father. His smile was still fixed, but his eyes, up close, were cold. The bourbon was swimming in them. "What is it, Quinn?" he asked, his voice low, a warning. "Come to congratulate your sister." I looked at him. I looked at the 280 guests watching us. I looked at the phone still pointed our way. "That's a lie," I said. My voice was clear. It didn't shake. It carried. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier and more terrible than the applause had ever been. Gregory's face changed. The mask of the charming patriarch didn't just slip, it shattered. The flush started at his thick neck and raced up into his hairline. The bourbon ignited. "What did you say?" he hissed. I said, "That's a lie," I repeated, louder this time, for the people in the back. "I never agreed to that." "You are embarrassing your sister," he spat, taking a step toward me. "It's my house," I said, standing my ground. "I bought it. I rebuilt it. It is mine." "Don't you dare," he growled, the word a low rumble. "Don't you dare ruin this." "You are giving away my house," I said, my voice rising, not in panic, but in pure, cold clarity. "It's mine." He moved faster than I thought possible. His hand, the one that had just raised a toast, shot out. It wasn't a slap, it was a grab. His fingers, thick and strong, clamped onto my shoulder like an iron hook. "You will be silent," he snarled, his face inches from mine, the smell of bourbon a toxic cloud. And he shoved me. He shoved me with the full force of his body, the full force of his rage. My feet left the floor. There was a moment of weightlessness, and then impact. My back and head hit the stone-clad ballroom wall. The sound. It wasn't a dull thud. It was a crack, a sharp, wet, intimate sound that seemed to tear the air apart. It was the sound of my skull connecting with unforgiving marble. My water glass, still in my hand, flew and shattered against the floor. For a second, there was no sound at all, just the ringing in my ears. Then, the screams started, high, piercing. A woman shrieked. "Oh my God!" I slid down the wall, but I didn't fall completely. I caught myself, my hand flat against the cold stone. A sharp sting bloomed on the back of my head, and then a sudden, shocking warmth. I touched my hair. My fingers came away dark, glistening in the chandelier light. Blood, hot and fast, already rolling down my neck. Beneath the collar of my dress, someone screamed to call 911. I looked up. The room was chaos. People standing, chairs scraping. But my eyes found two things. First, I saw Olivia. She was frozen, her hand over her mouth. But her eyes weren't on me. They weren't looking at the blood. Her eyes were wide with horror, scanning the crowd, scanning the phones that were all still pointed, not at her, but at the scene. She was watching her perfect day implode. Second, I saw the young man. He was standing by the bar, slightly removed from the main crowd. He'd been holding his phone up, like everyone else, but he hadn't flinched. He hadn't lowered it. He was still filming, his grip steady, and in the upper corner of his screen, I saw a small red light, steady and unblinking. It wasn't just recording, it was live. The distant, rising wail of sirens began to cut through the ringing in my ears. A guest, a woman I didn't know, rushed forward with a white linen napkin, pressing it to my head. "You're bleeding," she whispered, her voice shaking. Another phone, closer this time, pushed past her shoulder. The lens zoomed in, focusing tightly on the red stains spreading through my hair, stark and vivid against the pale, polished stone. I was the quiet child, the one who knew how to take things apart and, more importantly, put them back together. While other kids were outside, I was in the basement with a small toolkit, figuring out the guts of a broken radio or reinforcing the wobbly leg of a kitchen chair. I liked the logic of it. Things were broken, and you fixed them. There was a clear, tangible result. I loved the smell of sawdust and solder. The feeling of fitting two pieces of wood together so perfectly they seemed to fuse. In the Hart family, however, there was no value in fixing. There was only value in being seen. And in our house, all light, all eyes, all oxygen, went to Olivia. She was the golden girl. Her laughter was the soundtrack to our home. Her moods dictated the emotional weather. She was bright and charming and knew how to perform. I wasn't jealous. It was just a law of nature, like gravity. Olivia was the sun, and I was a dim planet in her orbit, useful for holding things, but never the center of the system. I was the background blur, the necessary, functional shadow that made her brightness pop. My father, Gregory, taught his lessons without words. He taught with his eyes. When I was 14, I tried to help him fix a sagging fence post in the backyard. I picked up the sledgehammer, bracing my feet the way I'd seen him do. He didn't yell. He just took it from my hand. His grip firm, his knuckles white. He didn't say, "You're too weak," or "You're a girl." He just looked at me with a flat, final dismissal. "Heavy work is for men, Quinn." I didn't learn that lesson from his words. I learned it from the splinter I got from the handle. I learned it from the shame that burned in my stomach as I stood aside and watched. From then on, I remembered, not with words, but with the memory of scratches, bruises, and the metallic taste of being dismissed. He would praise my good eye for color, but never my good hand for structure. Structure was his domain. This imbalance poisoned everything. When I won my first regional design award in college, a sleek, minimalist chair I had designed and built myself, I brought the plaque home. At dinner, I set it on the table. Gregory glanced at it, chewing his steak. Okay, he said, and then turned to Olivia. "How was rehearsal?" "Liv." 2 weeks later, Olivia was cast as third lady from the left in a community theater production of a musical nobody had ever heard of. She had maybe 4 lines. My parents bought 24 roses and popped a bottle of champagne. The good champagne, the one they saved for anniversaries. My mother, Diane, cried tears of joy. "She was just luminous," she kept saying. Dabbing her eyes, I watched them toast. My design plaque already gathering dust on a bookshelf in my old room, hidden behind Olivia's old dance trophies. I didn't feel anger, not yet. It was a cold, clarifying realization. The rules were simple. My work, my sweat, my tangible achievements were invisible. Olivia's presence was the achievement. I left home at 19. I couldn't breathe there anymore. I got a small apartment over a hardware store, the air perpetually smelling of paint thinner and cut pipe. I worked 2 jobs, from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. I was a barista, fueled by cheap coffee and the roar of the espresso machine. From 4 until midnight, I worked as a runner for a high-end architectural firm, fetching blueprints, carrying heavy sample books, and absorbing everything I could. I saved every single dollar I didn't spend on rent or instant noodles. My dream wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a penthouse or a sprawling new build. It was a pile of bricks, a collapsed, forgotten, water-damaged wreck of a house on Juniper Avenue. The city had condemned it. The roof was gone in 2 places. But I saw the bones. I saw the solid 19th century foundation and the good lines. I learned to live without their validation. I created my own. My motto became a quiet, internal mantra. When they don't give you light your own lamp. My mother, Diane, would call. Her voice was always soft, coded in concern. Quinn, honey, why are you working so hard? It's not healthy. Family is what matters. Family is first. But her family first was a velvet glove over an iron fist. It didn't mean we support each other. It meant you will conform to the family narrative. It meant your needs come after the family's image. Her comfort was a form of control, a soft, warm blanket meant to smother any spark of dissent before it could catch fire. While Olivia was being sent on trips to Europe to find herself, I was honing my craft. I was sketching on napkins during my 10-minute breaks. I was measuring joists and learning electrical code from library books. I salvaged materials, pulling perfect, old-growth timber from demolition sites, begging for leftover tile from construction crews. My nights smelled of pine, wood glue, and primer. My hands were perpetually calloused, my nails broken. A thin layer of drywall dust permanently settled in the creases of my skin. In those years of solitary work, I learned something vital. Prolonged silence isn't peace. It's just a scream that has been swallowed. It sits in your chest, a dense, heavy thing, waiting. It's the pressure building in a sealed pipe. Olivia and I grew into 2 different species. She learned how to receive. It was her primary skill. She accepted praise, gifts, attention, and opportunities with a graceful, practiced ease, as if it were her birthright. I learned how to do without. I learned how to build, to earn, to create from nothing, to be self-sufficient. I learned how not to need. This asymmetry wasn't just a quirk. It became a habit, and that habit became the premise for the tragedy that was waiting for us. Every family gathering, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter was a performance. It was a stage play. Olivia was the star, accepting applause for her new job, her new boyfriend, her new haircut. I was the stagehand. I was the one who arrived early to help my mother cook, the one who fixed the rattling air conditioner, the one who cleaned up the wrapping paper and stacked the dishes afterward. They needed my function, but they ignored my form. I finished the house. The day I installed the final piece of trim, I stood in the living room, and I knew I had done it. I had built something they couldn't touch. Or so I thought. I had built a fortress of my own making, a testament to my own hands. I had taken a ruin and given it life. I had made something real and solid and true, in a world that had only ever offered me a supporting role in a fantasy. I decided, standing there in the quiet of my own creation, that I would build something they could not co-opt, something they could not give away, something that was so intrinsically mine it would break them if they tried to take it. I was wrong. I had built the very thing they desired most, and I had forgotten the first rule of the Hart family. If it was good, it must, by definition, belong to Olivia. The first day I stood at 47 Juniper Avenue, I wasn't holding keys, I was holding a crowbar. The city had already condemned it, and I had just signed the papers that made it my problem. The neighbors, watching from behind their curtains, didn't wave. They just shook their heads. They saw a carcass, a failure waiting to happen. They weren't wrong. The roof was a sieve, a collection of rotten timbers and missing shingles. The foundation, a classic 19th century stone and mortar job, had a series of branching cracks you could fit your whole hand into. The front porch didn't just sag. It was actively peeling away from the house, pulling the entire facade down with it in a slow, structural grimace. That first winter was the crucible. The furnace was a monolithic, rusted-out hulk in the flooded basement, utterly dead. I couldn't afford a new one, not after pouring every cent I had, and several I didn't, into just acquiring the deed. So I lived in the attic. It was the only part of the house with a semi-intact roof, a small, triangular space under the eaves. I sealed the one window with plastic sheeting and slept on a cot, buried under 3 heavy blankets and my own winter coat. I'd wake up in the dark, my breath pluming in the air, the water in the glass by my bed frozen solid. My joints ached with a deep, penetrating cold that felt like it was settling into my bones. I worked my 2 jobs, came home to the ruin, and worked for 3 more hours by the light of a portable generator until my fingers were too numb to hold a hammer. I was fueled by cheap coffee and a cold, hard rage that I mistook for determination. I started with the bones. You can't heal the skin until the skeleton is sound. I learned to walk the attic joists, prying out the soft, punky wood of the rotten rafters. They crumbled in my hands, smelling of damp earth, mildew, and a century of decay. I learned to sister new beams to the old, bracing the spine of the house with fresh, strong timber. I learned to use a jack to lift a sagging corner of the house, millimeter by millimeter, the structure groaning in protest, until it was level again. Then I went to the foundation. I spent weeks on my knees in the dirt and mud of the crawl space, patching the walls. I learned to mix my own mortar, the ratio of sand to cement to lime, getting the consistency right by the feel of it in my gloved hand. It was slow, agonizing, back-breaking work. My trowel, scraping and smoothing, was the only sound. My hammer became a part of my body. Its rhythm was my heartbeat. Thud, a nail driving into new wood. Thud, a piece of old, useless lath breaking free. Thud, every swing was an assertion, I am here, this will stand. Every wheelbarrow of debris I hauled out, shattered plaster, rusted pipes, insulation that had turned to sodden nests, felt like a piece of my own past breaking off. I wasn't just emptying a house, I was emptying myself of all the okay, dismissals. Of all the years I'd spent as a shadow, I found the window at a salvage yard, pulled from a deconsecrated church downtown. It was a beautiful Gothic arch, but it was shattered in a dozen places. The lead came twisted and broken. I bought it for almost nothing. I spent an entire month of evenings at a rented workbench, meticulously taking it apart, cleaning every single piece of colored glass, relearning how to cut, wrap, and solder. My fingers were burned and sliced. When I finally heaved it into the frame I had built for it on the stair landing, the afternoon sun hit it. The light that spilled onto the floor wasn't just light, it was cobalt, and ruby, and a deep, clear emerald. It was the first truly beautiful thing in the house. It was a promise. The floors were next. They were original wide plank oak, but they were hidden under 3 layers of history-cracked 1970s linoleum, stained 1950s carpet, and a layer of grime that was almost geological. I rented a heavy-duty drum sander, a beast of a machine that fought me, threatening to rip itself from my grasp and tear a hole through the wall. I wrestled it for days, my arms vibrating, my ears ringing, my body coated in a fine, choking dust. But when I put that first coat of polyurethane down, the wood woke up. The grain emerged, a deep, swirling pattern of gold and amber. The sunlight, pouring through my new stained glass window, no longer hit a dead, dusty floor. It spilled like warm honey across a living surface. I learned the law, not just the property lines, but the physical law, the city code. I pulled my own electrical, threading heavy-gauge wire through walls I had built, learning the intricate logic of circuits, breakers, and grounds. I learned plumbing, sweating copper pipes in the crawl space, the smell of flux and the sharp hiss of the torch becoming a strange comfort. I made mistakes. I flooded the new kitchen floor twice. I had to rip out an entire wall of drywall because I had miscalculated the placement of a load-bearing stud. I failed, and I learned. I read code books until my eyes blurred. I watched grainy videos of old-timers framing walls. I learned from the men at the lumberyard, who at first had looked at me with pity and now nodded with a quiet respect. "Still at it, Reyes," one of them would say, loading a stack of 2x4s onto my truck. Slowly, agonizingly, the house began to stand up straight. It felt like it was taking its first full breath in 50 years. The doors, which I had planed and rehung in their squared-up frames, now closed with a soft, solid thunk instead of a rattling screech. I built a new front porch, dug new footings, and set new posts. From scrap steel I'd salvaged, I welded a porch swing. I hung it from thick chains, sat on it, and listened. No drips, no creaks, no wind whistling through cracks, just the sound of the evening breeze in the pines on Juniper Avenue. The neighbors, the ones who had watched from behind their curtains, started stopping. Mrs. Gable, from 2 doors down, brought me a glass of lemonade, her eyes wide. "Quinn," she said, it's a miracle." And then, my family came. They came on a Sunday. My mother, Diane, brought a casserole, as if visiting an invalid. My father, Gregory, walked through the front door, his heavy shoes loud on my honey-colored floors. He walked through the living room, looking at the exposed brick I had painstakingly chipped and repointed. He tapped the custom-built kitchen cabinets I had designed and built from scratch, the birch wood planed and joined by my own hands. He ran a hand over the countertops, made from thick, recycled butcher block I had sanded and sealed until they glowed. He looked at this world, this sanctuary that I had built from nothing, and he turned to me. "So," he said, his voice flat, "why did you waste so much good money on this pile of ruins?" Olivia, standing beside him, just wrinkled her nose. "It's so brown. Quinn, all this wood, aren't you going to paint it white? It would look so much cleaner." I didn't answer. I just took the casserole from my mother's hands. I stopped inviting them. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a confrontation. I just stopped. The calls came. "Why haven't we seen you?" But I had my excuse. "The house," I'd say. "So much work." The house became my fortress. It was the one place on earth that wasn't defined by them, that didn't ask me to be smaller, that didn't see my work as a waste, my self-respect. I realized, now had a foundation, it had a roof, and it had a deadbolt. My professional peers saw it. My friend Jacob Reddick, who ran his own restoration firm and had once helped me hoist the main ridge beam into place during a sudden hailstorm, came by. He walked through the whole house, silent, just touching the joinery on the staircase, the smooth plaster of the walls. He sat at my kitchen island, and I poured him a cup of cheap coffee. He looked around, his eyes taking in the light from the stained glass window. "Quinn, this is a miracle," he said, his voice quiet. I shook my head, smiling, feeling the familiar, good ache in my shoulders. "No, Jacob, it's labor." That labor became my living. 47 Juniper Avenue was a better business card than any website. A wealthy client, hesitant about hiring me, saw the house and hired me on the spot to restore their historic Victorian mansion. That contract led to 2 more. My name was no longer Quinn, the quiet daughter. I was Quinn Reyes, Restoration Design. My work was solid, my reputation was earned, and my house was my proof. But as the house settled into its new strength, as the paint finished curing and the new grass in the yard grew thick, something else grew with it, a sense of ownership from my family. A strange, unearned we started to creep into their conversations. "We should really have Thanksgiving at your place," my mother would say. "We should host the neighborhood Christmas party there," Gregory suggested, as if it were his own idea, the right to claim, which had been entirely absent when it was a ruin, began to attach itself to every finished surface, thick and fast as ivy. They hadn't wanted the ruin, but they desperately, confidently, wanted the triumph. The pressure started subtly, as it always does. It began at a mandatory Sunday dinner, about 3 months before the wedding. We were at my parents' house, the air thick with the smell of roast beef and my mother's heavy-handed perfume. Gregory, my father, was carving the meat, a little drunk already. The bourbon had been appearing earlier and earlier in the afternoons, a dark tide rising with the wedding preparations. So, Quinn, he said, not looking at me, his focus on the joint of beef. Olivia and Ethan are going to need a proper place to start a family. They'll need room for the kids. I sipped my water. I'm sure they'll find a lovely place. He paused the knife. You've got that big house all to yourself. Seems like a lot of space for one person. It wasn't a question. It was a probe, a soft insertion of an idea. My mother, Diane, chimed in immediately, her voice syrupy. A family home is such a blessing, isn't it? It's a legacy, something to be shared. She passed the gravy, her smile fixed and bright. We've always believed in keeping the family close. Melted butter on poison ivy, legacy, and shared were her preferred weapons. They were words that sounded like generosity, but were shaped like a cage. Then Olivia, my sister, giggled. She was picking at her salad, her new engagement ring flashing under the dining room chandelier. It's true, Quinn, we were just talking about it. That lovely south-facing room you use for your drafting, it gets the best light. It would be just perfect for a nursery. I put my fork down. The click of silver on porcelain was loud in the sudden quiet. They all looked at me, an expectant, smiling tribunal. This was the moment. The performance was supposed to begin. I was supposed to blush, to demur, and then to graciously offer up the fruits of my 3 years of labor. That's my studio, I said, my voice even. And that's my house. It's not available. The smiles flickered. Olivia pouted, a practiced look of disappointment she had perfected at age 5. My father's jaw tightened, and he went back to sawing at the beef. My mother's face went smooth and blank, her most dangerous expression. Well, she said, forcing a laugh, let's not talk about it now. More potatoes. Gregory. But the seed was planted. The shift had begun. In the weeks that followed, the language changed. Asking became assuming. If became when. My father's casual probes hardened into declarations. He'd call me, his voice already thick with an afternoon buzz. I was talking to Ethan's father. I mentioned the Juniper House. They're very impressed. He wasn't telling me. He was informing me of a decision he'd already marketed. When I reiterated my boundary, Dad, the house is not part of the wedding present. His voice turned to gravel. Don't be selfish. Quinn, this is for your sister. This is for the family. Selfish. The word he had always used to hammer me back into line. The word that meant you have something I want. The real escalation came on a Tuesday. I was on site at a client's project, a complicated Victorian restoration. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my doorbell camera. I opened the app. I saw my front porch, my porch swing, the one I had welded, and standing on it, laughing, was Olivia. Beside her was her fiancé, Ethan Price. She was pointing at my front door, talking. He was nodding. Then, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small, colored booklet, paint swatches. I watched, my blood turning to ice, as she held them up against my front door. The deep forest green I had custom mixed. She was testing new colors. I called her. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and breezy. Hey, Quinn. We were just in the neighborhood. Get off my porch. Olivia. What? Don't be silly. We were just looking at paint colors for the... She paused. You know, for the house. Ethan thinks this green is a little gloomy. I was thinking maybe a nice, cheerful yellow. You are trespassing, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You and Ethan need to leave, now. Oh, stop being so dramatic, she scoffed. We're just planning. Honestly, Ethan doesn't know why I'm being so nice about this. He says you're just being difficult. She turned to him, and I could hear her muffled voice through the phone's speaker. She's being difficult. I have your keys. Live, I said. A lie. The ones Mom and Dad copied without my permission. I'm changing the locks this afternoon. You have 10 seconds before I call the police. The laugh died in her throat. You wouldn't... Try me. I heard her hiss something to Ethan. The camera feed showed them scrambling off the porch, their faces a mask of indignation. A moment later, My phone buzzed with a text from her. "You're ruining everything. But it doesn't matter. You'll give it up eventually. You always do." I drove to the hardware store and bought 3 new, high-grade deadbolts. I spent the evening installing them, my drill biting into the solid oak frames I had built. I felt like I was barricading myself in. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt different, violated. Every creak of the old wood settling was a footstep. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it, a distinct sound from the new front porch, a footstep on the board I had just replaced. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera app. The feed was dark, just the faint blue glow of the camera's own ring light. But it had caught the motion. It was probably just a deer or a raccoon. But as I watched, a shadow moved at the edge of the frame. Near the steps, someone had been there. The camera's blue light flashed. A silent, digital heartbeat in the dark. I sat there until dawn, holding my phone, every lock in the house engaged. The final piece clicked into place 2 days later. A text message from my mother. It arrived at breakfast, innocent and bright. "Just confirming you're coming to the final dress fitting on Saturday. So excited, P.S. Please, honey, whatever you're feeling, don't make a scene on Olivia's big day. It would just destroy her. Family first. Don't make a scene." I put the phone down on my butcher block counter. The coffee in my mug was cold, and I understood. It wasn't a request. It was a threat. They weren't going to have this fight with me in private, where I could show them the deed, the receipts, the calluses on my hands. They wouldn't risk a fight they might lose. They were going to do it in public, at the wedding, in front of 280 witnesses. They were going to announce it as a grand gesture, a beautiful surprise, and box me in. They were going to use my love for my sister, my fear of public humiliation, and my lifelong training in family first as a weapon to silence me. They would make me the villain if I said no. I would be the selfish one who ruined everything. I looked at my mother's text. "Don't make a scene." They were counting on it. They were counting on my silence. The silence they had cultivated in me my entire life. A new kind of anger, cold and sharp as a chisel, settled in my stomach. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They thought that because I had swallowed their dismissals for 30 years, I had no throat left to scream. I opened my laptop. I created a new, encrypted folder. I scanned my original deed of sale. I scanned the paid-in-full property tax records for the past 3 years, all in my name. I scanned the invoices for the lumber, the new electrical panel, the copper piping, the roofing shingles, the drywall, thousands of dollars, all from my business account. I created a digital fortress, a meticulous archive of every single brick I had paid for and every hour I had worked. I emailed the entire file to my personal private account with a timestamp. Then I picked up my phone. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Olivia. I called Jacob Reddick. He picked up on the second ring, his voice calm over the sound of a distant sander. "Quinn, what's wrong?" He could always tell. I told him everything. The dinner, the paint swatches, the text message. He was silent for a moment. The sander in the background stopped. "So," he said, "they're going to try and steal your house in front of a live studio audience." "That's the plan," I said. "Okay," he said. He wasn't emotional. He was structural, just like me. "Okay, you have the deed, the receipts, the invoices. You have the electronic trail. Good. You're prepared. But Quinn—" "I know," I said. "People like your father," Jacob said, his voice heavy. "The men who are used to writing the rules. They don't stop just because you say no. They don't hear no. They just hear a challenge. If they push, we build a legal wall, and we make it so high they can't climb it." I hung up, the feeling of cold resolve hardening. I had learned a bitter lesson. Those accustomed to absolute power do not surrender it gracefully. They do not stop when you ask. They only stop when they hit a barrier they cannot break. I was going to the wedding. I was going to walk into their trap with my eyes wide open, and I was going to be that barrier. I was going to be the wall. The reception at the Summit Crown was a masterpiece of illusion. The grand ballroom was a sea of white carpets and mountain wildflowers, thousands of them, their sweet, cloying scent mixing with the smell of expensive wine and roasted lamb. People laughed, their voices bright and brittle under the blaze of the crystal chandeliers. I had chosen a simple navy sheath dress, the color of a deep bruise. It was functional, understated, and easy to move in. As I had planned, I found my place near the main service entrance, a familiar position in the shadows, my back to a cold pillar, holding a simple glass of water. I watched the room, a designer assessing a faulty structure, waiting for the inevitable collapse. At precisely 8 o'clock, the sound I had been waiting for cut through the manufactured joy. Ting, ting, ting. Gregory Hart, my father, stood at the head table, tapping a silver spoon against his champagne flute. The string quartet faded out. The laughter and chatter died, replaced by the rustle of 280 people turning in their seats. He beamed, his face flushed with bourbon and success. He raised his glass, a practiced, expansive gesture that took in the entire room. "Friends, family," his voice boomed, amplified by the microphone, rolling over every table, silencing every whisper. "My beautiful daughter, Olivia, and my new son, Ethan. What a day! What a perfect day!" Polite applause. Olivia, seated beside him, glowed, her face a perfect mask of bridal joy. "A day like this," he continued, "a day this important, deserves a foundation, a real foundation." He paused for effect, his showman's timing impeccable. "And so, it is my incredible honor to announce a gift, a truly special gift, from our family to theirs, a gift from her older sister." He turned and gestured, not to me, but to the space where I should have been, near their table. "Quinn, my other wonderful daughter, has decided, in an act of incredible generosity, to gift her beautiful restored home on Juniper Avenue to her sister and new husband." The room exploded. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar, whistles, cheers, people leaping to their feet. "Bravo!" someone shouted. "How generous!" a woman cried out, dabbing her eye. They were applauding a lie, a grand, beautiful performance of theft. I looked at my father, who was bathing in the sound, his arm outstretched, accepting congratulations for a generosity that was not his. I saw Olivia, who had perfected her look of stunned, tearful gratitude, as if this was the first she was hearing of it. She and Ethan were hugging. This was it, the public trap. The moment they had engineered to perfection, I was supposed to be frozen, silenced by the sheer weight of public expectation, forced to smile and nod, to participate in my own dismemberment. My hand was steady. My glass of water didn't tremble. I set it down on a server's tray nearby. I began to walk. I stepped out of the shadows. My navy dress was a slash of darkness against the sea of white and champagne-colored silk. Click, 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 my heels on the stone floor. It was the only sound other than the fading applause. The room fell silent again, this time with a confused, anxious energy. Faces turned. My mother, Diane, saw me first. Her smile froze, and a flicker of pure panic crossed her eyes. She knew. I stopped directly in front of the head table. I looked past Olivia, past Ethan, and directly at my father. He was still smiling, but the smile was now a thin, hard line. The bourbon was radiating off him. "Quinn," he said into the microphone, his voice a low warning. "Come to add your congratulations." I didn't need a microphone. My voice was clear, and I pitched it to Carrie. "That is a lie," I said. The silence was no longer anxious. It was absolute. It was a vacuum. 280 people stopped breathing. I never agreed to that. My father's face, which had been flushed with pride, turned a dark, mottled purple. The mask didn't just slip. It was gone. "What?" he hissed. "Did you just say to me?" He stepped down from the low platform of the head table. "I said that is a lie," I repeated. my voice louder, unwavering. "I am not giving away my house." "You will not," he snarled, taking 2 steps toward me, jabbing his finger in my face. "Embarrass me. You will not embarrass this family." "You are embarrassing yourself," I said, and I saw a flash of pure, murderous rage in his eyes. This was the real Gregory Hart. This was the man I had known my entire life, the one the bourbon always revealed. "It is my house," I said, my voice ringing with the clarity of a bell. "I built it. It is mine." "Not any more," he roared. His hand shot out. It clamped onto my shoulder, his fingers digging into my collarbone like a steel trap. He was incredibly strong, and he shoved me. It was a full-body assault. He used his shoulder and all his weight, pivoting and driving me backward. I was airborne for a split second, my feet leaving the white carpet, ram, my back, and then my head, slammed into the marble-clad structural pillar behind me. The sound was obscene. It was a wet, heavy crack that echoed through the ballroom, louder than his voice, louder than the applause. It was the sound of bone hitting stone. The world went white, then black, then resolved into a kaleidoscope of spinning chandelier lights. My water glass, which I must have picked back up, shattered on the floor. Screams, not one, but a dozen. High-pitched, horrified. I felt a sharp, electric sting, and then a sudden, gushing warmth. It was liquid heat, pouring down the back of my neck, soaking the collar of my dress, matting my hair in an instant. Blood. I didn't fall. My knees buckled, but I threw my hands out, bracing myself against the pillar. The ringing in my ears was a roar, but I locked my elbows. I would not go down. I would not give him the satisfaction. I straightened my spine, my head throbbing in a way that scared me. I turned my head and looked at him. My eyes were clear. I did not blink. I did not look away. He stood there, panting, his tuxedo jacket askew, his hands still raised, frozen in the follow-through of his assault. He was staring, not at me, but at the blood. I saw Olivia move. She stood up, her white dress a blur. She took a step toward me, but she didn't rush to help. She didn't look at my head. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a practiced, theatrical horror. She was looking at the guests. She was looking at the audience. She was still performing. Her perfect day was ruined, and that was the real tragedy. She wasn't my sister. She was a co-star in my father's production. "Oh my God," a man shouted from a nearby table. "Call 911. He slammed her into the wall." "He hit her," a woman shrieked, her voice cracking. "Trisha, call 911. Now." I looked past my father, past the frozen, horrified bridal party. My eyes found the young man at the bar. He was still there. He hadn't moved, and his phone was still up, held high, his grip rock steady. He was capturing it all. The shove, the impact, the screams, the blood matting in my hair, and in the top corner of his phone screen, the small, red, rectangular icon glowed. It didn't just say rec, it said live. My blood dripped from my hair onto the floor. It was dark, almost black against the polished white stone. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop was a punctuation mark. Each drop was a signature, a new boundary line, drawn in an ink they could not erase. I saw other phones, a dozen, 20, all reflecting the same scene from different angles, all pointed at my father, at me, at the blood on the white stone, in the distance, faint but growing. I heard the sound I knew would be coming, the rising, two-tone wail of sirens, cutting through the thin Arbortown air. Gregory finally snapped out of it. He looked around, his eyes wide and panicked. Seeing the phones, hearing the sirens, he saw his world dissolving. He tried to fix it. He tried to rewrite the script. It was an accident, he stammered, holding his hands up, palms out. She slipped. She's just overwrought. It was a simple accident. But his voice, which had boomed with such authority just 2 minutes before, was now thin and weak. No one was listening. No one was looking at him with anything but horror. No one believed him. The lie was finally, irrevocably, broken. The world snapped back into focus under the harsh, humming glare of fluorescent lights, the chaotic symphony of the ballroom, the screams, the shattering glass. The sirens was replaced by the sterile quiet of the hospital. The air smelled of antiseptic, bleach, and the faint, bitter scent of burned coffee from a machine down the hall. A doctor, his eyes kind but exhausted, was finishing his work. "Well, it's a clean laceration," he said, his voice muffled by his mask. "But it went right to the bone. We're putting in 7 staples." He paused, looking at my chart. "You also have a mild concussion, Ms. Reyes. You were right on the edge of blacking out. Someone hit you." "My father," I said. My voice sounded strange, distant. "He shoved me into a wall." The doctor just nodded, his eyes saying he'd heard stranger things, but not many. "We're required to report this. You know." "I know," I said. "Where are the police officers?" "Waiting outside," he said, applying the final piece of tape. "You're all set, but we need to keep you for observation for at least a few hours. A nurse will be in." I was left alone in the cubicle. The thin curtain pulled shut. My head was a universe of dull, pounding pain. My navy dress was stiffening at the collar, crusty with my own dried blood. My phone, which a paramedic had retrieved from the floor and shoved into my purse, began to buzz. It didn't just buzz once, it vibrated continuously, a frantic, insistent shaking on the bedside table, as if it were trying to escape. A nurse bustled in, checking the monitor I was hooked up to. She glanced at the phone, which was lighting up, buzzing like a trapped wasp. "You're popular," she said, with a tight, nervous smile. Then she looked at my face, really looked at me, her eyes widening in recognition. "Oh my God," she whispered. You're her, the woman from the wedding." I stared at her. "What?" She fumbled for her own phone in her pocket. It's everywhere. My daughter just sent it to me." She held her screen up to me. It was a video, already grainy from being copied and reshared. It was the young man from the bar. His angle. It showed my father's toast. It showed me walking forward. It showed the entire, brutal sequence, the close-up on my face, the argument, the hand clamping my shoulder, the shove, the sickening, resonant crack as my head hit the stone pillar, the screams. It was all there. "It went live," she said, her voice awed. Look at the views." I squinted at the number at the bottom of the screen. It wasn't 5,000. It wasn't 50,000. It was 5 million. 5 million views. Overnight. "My God," she said, scrolling. The hashtags, Summit Crown Slam, Heartless, Justice for Quinn. She looked at me. Her professional veneer gone, replaced by something else. Pity, or perhaps just shock. "Honey, the whole world saw what he did to you." The buzzing on my own phone finally stopped, only to immediately start again. The police came in next. 2 officers, a man and a woman. Their faces were grim. They had none of the doctor's clinical detachment. They looked angry. "Ms. Reyes," the female officer, Officer Klemper, said, "We've already taken preliminary statements at the hotel. We have, at last count, 34 cell phone videos, plus the live stream, and the Summit Crown is fully cooperating. They have overhead security footage of the entire incident." She closed her notebook. "We have multiple clear-angle videos of a felony assault. The evidence is, to be blunt, overwhelming. We already have your father, Gregory Hart, detained." She looked at me, her expression softening for a fraction of a second. "I have to ask the official question. Do you wish to press charges?" I thought of my father's hand. I thought of the bourbon on his breath. I thought of the word selfish. I thought of the stained glass window in my house, the one I had built with my own hands. I thought of the crack echoing in the ballroom. There was no hesitation. There was no internal debate. The person who might have wavered, the girl trained to put family first, had died on that ballroom floor. "Yes," I said. Absolutely. Officer Klemper nodded. A sharp, satisfied gesture. Good. We'll need a full statement when you're ready. I was discharged at dawn, the sky a pale, bruised gray, as I walked out, staples itching in my scalp and a prescription for pain medication in my hand. I saw him, Jacob Reddick. He was leaning against his truck, which was parked in the ambulance bay. He wasn't wearing his work flannel or dusty jeans. He was wearing a dark gray suit and a pressed white shirt. It was the suit he wore to meet with bank presidents and city council members. He looked solid, like a load-bearing wall. He didn't rush over. He didn't offer a hug or a word of pity. He just opened the passenger door for me. I got in. He walked around, got into the driver's seat, and for a moment, we just sat in the quiet of the truck, the engine humming. How's the head? He asked. Stapled, I said. Okay, he nodded. He put the truck in gear. I've already made the call. Her name is Monica Vale, Vale North. She's a litigator, the best in Arbortown. She handles complex property disputes and corporate malfeasance. Seem to me you've got a foot in both worlds now. Thank you, Jacob, I said, the words feeling small. We start with the documents. Quinn, he said, pulling out of the hospital lot. We go to your house. We gather the deed, the tax records, every receipt. We build the fortress. Then we let Monica go to war. Monica Vale's office was the opposite of my house, where I had warm wood and reclaimed brick. She had floor-to-ceiling glass, chrome, and black leather. She was a tall woman with sharp features and an unnervingly calm gaze. She didn't offer me coffee. She offered me a seat. Jacob laid out the file, the deed, the tax records, the digital archive of receipts. She looked through it, her speed belying her thoroughness. She spent less than 10 minutes reviewing 3 years of my life. She closed the file. The house is yours, legally. It's ironclad. This isn't a property dispute. It's a criminal matter with a property motive. Our first move is defensive. She spun to her computer. I'm filing an emergency restraining order against Gregory Hart, Diane Hart, and Olivia Hart, barring them from coming within 500 feet of you or 47 Juniper Avenue. I'm also filing a temporary injunction against any transfer of title and notifying the county recorder. As of 10 o'clock this morning, that house is in legal lockdown. He couldn't sell it or leverage it if he tried. She turned back to me. Second, we build the offensive case. I need every threat, every piece of coercion, the text messages from your sister, the phone calls from your father, the dinner where they suggested you give them the house. How did you know about that? It's a classic playbook, she said, without a trace of a smile. From this moment on, you are an evidence locker. You do not speak to your family, not by phone, not by text, not in person. Any communication they send you, you screenshot, you save, and you forward to my office. We are building a timeline of premeditated intent to defraud, which culminated in a violent assault when you refused. Is that clear? Yes, I said. It was the clearest thing in the world. The first test came that afternoon. My phone, which I'd charged, lit up with a voicemail. My mother, Diane, I played it on speaker for Monica. Her voice was a wreck, full of tears and pleading. Quinn, darling, please, what are you doing? You have to stop this. You've called the police. You're pressing charges, Quinn. He's your father. He loves you. You're destroying this family. You're destroying your sister's life. This is a mistake. Call it off. Honey, please, call it off. Family is first. I looked at Monica. Her face was impassive. Do you hear what she's doing? Monica asked, her voice cold. She's begging, I said, my stomach twisting. No, Monica corrected. She is not apologizing. She is not asking if you are okay. She is making his actions your responsibility. She is using guilt to coerce you into dropping a felony charge. This is not a plea. This is a control tactic. Save the audio file. Send it to me. Label it Coercion Attempt 1. An hour later, a text came through. Olivia. My wedding is ruined. My life is ruined. Ethan is horrified. His parents are talking about annulling the marriage. This is all your fault. I hope you're happy. I stared at the words. My fault. I remembered her face in the ballroom, her eyes scanning the crowd, performing her horror for the guests instead of looking at my bleeding head. My fingers moved over the keyboard. I didn't hesitate. I didn't cry. I just stated a fact. This is my life. I hit send. Monica, meanwhile, was preparing our public stance. The video is viral, she said. The narrative is already on your side, but it's volatile. We need to control it. She drafted a short, concise press release and sent it to every major news outlet in the state. Ms. Quinn Reyes is recovering from injuries sustained in an assault at the Summit Crown. She is cooperating fully with the Arbortown Police Department in their ongoing investigation. We will not be commenting further on the criminal matter. All inquiries regarding the undisputed ownership and title of the property at 47 Juniper Avenue may be directed to the law firm of Vale North. She had done it. In 2 sentences, she had legally bound the assault to the property dispute. She took Gregory's lie, a generous gift, and turned it into the motive for a crime. The first domino fell before the 6 o'clock news. Pioneer Ridge Developments, my father's company, had its name on half the new construction in Arbortown. A local news anchor, reading Monica's statement, made the connection. Sources say the alleged assault occurred after a dispute over a valuable property Gregory Hart had publicly, and perhaps falsely, announced he was giving away. An hour later, the main sponsor for the new Pioneer Ridge downtown plaza, a major bank, issued a statement. We are deeply disturbed by the events at the Summit Crown and are reevaluating our financial commitment. The phone in Monica's office rang. It was the general manager of the Summit Crown. He was appalled. He was devastated this had happened. He was voluntarily and fully cooperating with the police. And, he added, their high-definition overhead security cameras, the ones that covered the entire ballroom, had captured the incident from start to finish. They were sending the digital master file to the police and a copy to Vale North, free of charge. Monica hung up the phone. We now have the assault from God's point of view, a perfect, unobstructed, high-definition view. She looked at me, the first hint of something other than cool professionalism in her eyes. This is it, Ms. Reyes. They expected you to be silent. They expected you to go to the hospital, cry, and then take your mother's phone call and put family first. They never, in a million years, expected you to hire me. She tapped her tablet, bringing up the trending hashtags. You're not just a designer anymore. You've become an icon overnight for every person who's ever been told to be quiet. No means no, even to family. The world is watching. Quinn, let's make sure they see the unadorned truth. The next morning, we returned to the scene of the crime, the Summit Crown, in the flat. Unforgiving light of day had lost its magic. The grand ballroom was still set for the post-wedding brunch, but the energy was gone, leaving a vacuum. The staff moved with a funereal quiet. The thousands of mountain flowers were still in their vases, but they were a day old. Their perfume was still heavy, but underneath it, I could smell the first, faint, sweet-sour note of decay. It was the smell of rot setting in beneath the perfume. There were perhaps 30 guests, the ones who hadn't seen the video yet, or the ones who were too morbidly curious to stay away. They were clustered in small, uneasy groups, drinking mimosas and speaking in whispers. The whispers stopped when we walked in. I came first. Then Monica Vale, carrying a sleek black projector and her laptop. Then Jacob, his solid presence at my back. I had not hidden the wound. I had showered, washing the matted blood from my hair, and the white bandage the doctor had applied was a stark, clean line against my dark hair, just above my temple. I wore it like a statement. I had not slept. My eyes were clear and, I knew, terrifyingly calm. I wore a simple black dress. I was in mourning for the life I'd had. I saw him, my father. He was by the omelet bar, a glass of bourbon already, at 10 in the morning in his hand. He was trying to perform, laughing too loudly at something a nervous-looking guest had said. He was trying to pretend last night was a blur, a drunken mishap. He saw me. His laughter died. The bourbon-fueled flush in his face darkened. He saw the bandage. "Well, look who it is," he snarled. His voice a low growl that carried across the room. He was trying to reclaim his power, to mark his territory. He gestured at my head with his glass. "Looks fine to me. Always did like to be dramatic." A few of the guests winced. They looked down at their plates, profoundly embarrassed. This was not the Gregory Hart they knew, or rather, this was him. And they were just seeing it for the first time. Monica ignored him. She ignored everyone. She walked to the center of the room, to the large, empty space by the head table, the exact spot where I had been assaulted. She set her projector on a small table. She unrolled a portable screen. The hotel manager, his face pale and sweaty, rushed over to help her, plugging in a power cord. The room watched, confused. This was not on the brunch program. Jacob stood, arms crossed, near the entrance, a silent guardian. I walked to a table near the center and sat down. I did not take a plate. I just waited. Gregory watched Monica, his eyes narrowing. "What the hell is this? A slideshow? The wedding's over." Monica finished connecting her laptop. She clicked a key. The projector whirred, and a bright white light hit the screen. Then, an image, the familiar, time-stamped, black and white grid of a security system. "Good morning, everyone," Monica Vale said. Her voice was not loud, but it was so cold and precise that it cut through every whisper. "Thank you for attending this gathering. Mr. Hart was kind enough to give his version of events last night. Now, as his legal counsel has been attempting to reframe those events this morning as an unfortunate family stumble, we felt it was important to review the facts." She clicked the mouse. The first video that appeared was the one from the bar, the live stream. The audio was slightly muffled by the music, but the images were clear. My father's toast, my approach, the argument. Then the screen split into 4. 2 more angles from cell phones on opposite sides of the room appeared, and then the 4th, the master, the God's eye view. The crystal clear, high definition, overhead security footage from the Summit Crown, and with it, the audio, not muffled. It was pristine, captured by the ceiling microphones. "You will not embarrass this family." My father's voice, a raw snarl, filled the silent ballroom. "It's my house. It is mine." My voice, clear and cold. "Not anymore," he roared. And then, the act, the 4-angle view of the shove, the grab, the pivot, the violent, full-bodied thrust, my body flying backward, and the sound, the crack. It was amplified by the event speakers. It wasn't a thud. It was a sharp, wet, percussive snap. The sound of my skull hitting the marble pillar, as clear and sickening as a gunshot. A woman at a front table screamed, a high, thin sound, and clapped her hand over her mouth. A man cursed. "Jesus Christ!" The video continued. It showed, in perfect, high definition, the blood spreading. It showed me sliding, bracing myself. It showed my father, panting, his face contorted. It showed Olivia, her eyes darting to the crowd, performing. Monica let it play for 10 seconds more. 10 seconds of chaos, of screams, of guests yelling to call 911. Then she paused it, on a perfect, frozen, multi-angle close-up of my father's face, twisted in rage, and my own, bleeding against the stone. No one spoke. The only sound was the woman in the front, who was now openly sobbing. Gregory was pale, his bourbon glass frozen halfway to his mouth. "That," Monica said, her voice dropping an octave, "was the unfortunate family stumble." She walked to the table where I sat and placed a thick, black binder on it. The sound, a heavy, solid thud, was an answer to the crack on the video. "This," she said, tapping the binder, "is a copy of the official police report, filed by the Arbortown Police Department last night, charging Mr. Gregory Hart with felony assault with intent to cause bodily harm. She opened it. The top page was the report, stamped with an official, raised seal. The video, along with 34 other witness recordings, is now evidence in a criminal proceeding. This is no longer a private family matter. My mother, Diane, finally broke. She had been frozen, her face a mask of waxy horror. She scrambled up and rushed, not to her husband, but to me. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "Quinn," she hissed, her voice a desperate, frantic whisper. "Stop this. You have to stop this, right now. You are tearing us apart. Think of your sister. Think of this family. Don't do this. Don't make this any worse." I didn't argue. I didn't speak. I didn't even look at her. I simply, and deliberately, unpried her fingers from my arm. I stood up, and I took one step away from her. I left her standing alone, her hand outstretched, her plea for silence hanging in the air, exposed and rotten for everyone to see. A man near the back, a man I recognized as Ethan's father, spoke, his voice shaking with a cold fury. "Gregory, did you do that? Did you do that to your own daughter?" The crowd, which had been frozen, shifted. It was a physical thing, like a herd turning. They had been facing Gregory, the center of gravity. Now, they were turning on him. Ethan Price, Olivia's new husband, had been standing near her, his face ashen. He looked at the frozen image on the screen. He looked at the sobbing guest. He looked at Ethan's father, his own. Then he looked at Olivia. She had started to cry, but her performance, which had worked so well just 12 hours before, was failing. There was no applause. There was no sympathy. Her tears looked, in the harsh morning light, like what they were, a desperate, selfish act. Ethan did the most eloquent thing I had ever seen him do. He took one, small, deliberate step away from her. He was disconnecting. He was stepping off the deck of a sinking ship. Olivia saw it. Her fake sobs turned into a real, choked gasp. But, my wedding," she whispered. She ruined my wedding." No one moved to comfort her. My father finally found his voice. He slammed his glass down. "This is a disgrace," he bellowed. "This is a private matter. She's hysterical. She's always been difficult. This is about family loyalty." "No, Dad," I said, and my voice, though quiet, silenced his. I didn't have to shout. The truth was on the screen. "It's not. It's about a house." I turned to Monica. "Show them the rest." Monica nodded. She clicked the mouse again. The screen changed. It was now a split image. On one side, a photo of 47 Juniper Avenue as I had bought it, a collapsed, rotten ruin. On the other side, a photo from a week ago, a restored, beautiful, finished home. And then she put up the receipts, the deed, in my name, the tax bills, paid by me, the invoice for the lumber, the invoice for the electrical, the invoice for the roof. The room was a courtroom now. The guests were the jury, the masks, the ones my family had worn for decades, the successful father, the loving mother. The golden daughter were not just cracked. They were on the floor, in 1,000 pieces, right next to the memory of my shattered water glass. And everyone, finally, was seeing the ugly, grasping faces underneath. The collapse began less than an hour after the brunch. While Monica and I were still in her office, Officer Klemper called, my father, attempting to leave the Summit Crown through a service exit, was formally arrested. He didn't go quietly. He shouted about his lawyers, about his rights, about who he was. It didn't matter. The local news, alerted by a hotel employee, was waiting. By noon, the entire city of Arbortown was watching the same image on a loop. Gregory Hart, founder of Pioneer Ridge Developments, his face a mask of purple rage, being forced into the back of a police car. His hands cuffed behind his back. He made bail by 3 o'clock. The bond was set high, but he paid it in cash. He walked out of the precinct, his expensive suit rumpled, and said no comment to a barrage of microphones, but the damage was done. The image of the handcuffs was indelible. The dominoes, which had been teetering, began to fall, one after another, in a relentless, percussive rhythm. The first was financial. On Monday morning, the Arbortown City Council held an emergency session. Pioneer Ridge Developments was the primary contractor on 3 major urban renewal projects, funded by city bonds. By 10 a.m., the council had voted unanimously to suspend all 3 contracts, pending a moral and financial review. It was a loss of tens of millions of dollars. By noon, the bank that held the primary line of credit for Pioneer Ridge, the same bank whose VP had sponsored a table at the wedding, announced it was placing all of Gregory's corporate accounts under immediate audit. His credit, the lifeblood of his development empire, was frozen. By 5 o'clock, a consortium of minority shareholders in Pioneer Ridge, seeing their investment value plummet, had formally petitioned the board for an emergency meeting. Their demand was simple and brutal. Gregory Hart must resign as CEO. Effective immediately, the second domino was social. The Hart name, once a symbol of Arbortown philanthropy and power, became toxic overnight. The board of the Arbortown Children's Charity, which my mother had chaired for a decade, quietly removed her name from their letterhead. The annual Hart Family Foundation Gala, the pinnacle of the city's social calendar, was indefinitely postponed. Invitations to golf tournaments, gallery openings, and private dinners simply stopped. The silence from their social circle was as absolute as the noise from the media. The third domino was Olivia, the Price family, Ethan's wealthy and image-conscious parents, moved with surgical precision. They released a statement not to the press, but to their own social and business circle, making it clear they were appalled by the unconscionable behavior and that they were supporting their son, Ethan, through this difficult time. The statement pointedly never mentioned Olivia's name. 2 days later, a society blogger posted a candid photo of Olivia, her face pale and swollen, walking into a lawyer's office. Her left hand was bare. The spectacular 4-carat diamond ring was gone. The marriage, it seemed, had lasted less than 48 hours. Then, a new piece of evidence, a new leak, came from an unexpected place. A woman who had been one of Olivia's bridesmaids, horrified by the video, sent a series of screenshots to a local reporter. They were texts from Olivia, sent 3 weeks before the wedding. Olivia: "Ugh, Quinn is being such a martyr about the Juniper house. She won't just give it to me. Friend LOL what? It's her house." Olivia: "Dad's gonna handle it. He's just going to announce it at the wedding. She'll have to say yes. It's my day. I get what I want." The screenshots went viral in an hour. They were absolute, irrefutable proof of the conspiracy. They vaporized any lingering sympathy for Olivia, any narrative that she was an innocent bystander. She wasn't just a co-star. She was a co-writer of the plot. My mother, Diane, tried to do damage control in the only way she knew how. She tried to host one of her famous reconciliation teas. She invited 20 of her most influential friends. 3 came. They were the oldest, the ones who didn't use the internet. They sat in the cavernous, silent living room of my parents' house, drank their tea quickly, made their excuses, and left within 20 minutes. The failure was public, humiliating, and complete. Power rarely dies quietly. Quinn. Monica was in my kitchen at Juniper 47. We were drinking coffee, the good coffee Jacob always brought. "They are wounded, which means they are dangerous. Your father will hire the most expensive, ruthless lawyers in the state. They will try to bury us in motions. They will paint you as unstable, as greedy, as a liar. This isn't the end. This is the end of the beginning. Be ready for a long, ugly fight." I nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." "Good," she said, "because the world is listening to you now." She was right. The letters had started to arrive. First, emails, then actual handwritten letters to Monica's office, forwarded to my house. They came from women and men all over the country. "Thank you for saying no. I watched your video, and I finally confronted my brother about the money he borrowed." Thank you for showing me what a boundary looks like. I'm building my own. I read every one, my hands shaking. I had just been trying to save my house. I hadn't realized I was speaking for so many other people who had been silenced. A local organization, a women's shelter and advocacy group called Juniper Justice. A coincidence of name that felt like fate asked me to speak at a small fundraiser. I said yes. I stood in front of 50 people, in a small, warm room that smelled like coffee and old books. The white bandage was gone, but the staples were still there, hidden by my hair. I didn't have a speech. I just had the truth. For years, I was told that family first meant me last, I said, my voice steady. I was taught that my work was a hobby and my voice was an interruption. I built a house to prove I existed, and when they tried to take it, I finally learned something. No is not a request. It's a statement. It is a complete sentence. It is a wall. Do not let anyone, no matter who they are, no matter how much you love them, take what you have built with your own hands. The applause was quiet, but it was powerful. It was the opposite of the roar at the wedding. It was real. The house itself was changing. It was no longer just my fortress. Jacob, seeing my name in the paper, had an idea. Let's use this, he said. Let's make this house what it was always meant to be. We launched the Juniper Restoration Workshops. We opened the house on Saturdays to apprentices, design students, and anyone who wanted to learn. I taught them how to use a planer, how to mix mortar, how to read the history in a piece of wood. Jacob brought his team of master artisans, my house, my sanctuary, filled with the sounds of careful work, of questions and answers, of sawdust and creation. It had become a living thing, a school. The legal case grew stronger. The hotel's insurance company, eager to separate themselves from liability, sent Monica's team the full, unedited logs from their security system. Not just the video, but the access logs. It showed my father's room key being used to access the ballroom's AV system an hour before the wedding. He had tested the microphone himself. It was proof of premeditation. The final domino for Pioneer Ridge Developments fell on a Friday. The board of directors, in a 4-hour closed-door meeting, voted. The vote was unanimous. Gregory Hart was removed as CEO and president. Effective immediately, he lost his salary, his stock options, and all of his corporate signing power. He was an emperor with no clothes and no empire. The media offers poured in, talk shows, magazine exclusives, book deals, all offering me money to tell my story, to cry on camera, to reveal all. I turned them all down. This isn't entertainment, I told Monica. This isn't a show. This is a criminal proceeding and a boundary. I won't sell it. That evening, I got an email. It was from Ethan Price. Quinn, I have no words. I am so sorry for what happened. I was blind. I didn't see what was happening. I know this doesn't mean anything, but I am ashamed of my part in all of it. I wish you peace. I read it. I saw the careful, lawyer-approved wording, the apology that was more about his shame than my pain. I didn't reply. I just archived the message. I walked out onto my front porch, the one he had stood on, planning to change its color. I sat on the swing I had welded. The air was cool, smelling of pine and the sawdust from the workshop. The house was quiet, solid around me. I was safe. I was home, and I was free. The courtroom was an exercise in contrasts. The wood paneling was dark, almost black, stained by a century of serious, heavy decisions. The light was not the warm glow of a chandelier. It was the flat, humming, clinical white of fluorescent tubes. The air smelled of old paper, floor wax, and the metallic tang of stale coffee. I sat at the prosecution table, beside the assistant district attorney. Monica Vale sat directly behind me, her files in a neat stack on her lap. Behind her sat Jacob, his broad shoulders filling the bench, his hands clasped in front of him. He was not fidgeting. He was as still and solid as the foundation of my house, across the aisle. Gregory sat with his new legal team, 3 men in identical dark blue suits, their faces expensive and impassive. My father looked diminished. The bourbon flush was gone, replaced by a gray, papery pallor. His eyes were sunk deep in his head. In the gallery, 2 rows behind him, sat my mother. Diane was wearing a muted beige suit, the color of a waiting room. She stared at the back of her husband's head, her hands clutching a purse in her lap. She never once looked at me. Olivia was not there. Monica had confirmed it that morning. Her new, high-powered PR firm, retained by Ethan's family as a non-negotiable part of the annulment proceedings, had advised her that attending would be detrimental to her brand. She was in the process of being repackaged as another tragic victim of her father's uncontrollable passions. It was a weak narrative, but it was the only one she had. "The prosecution calls its first witness," the DA said, her voice clear and high. "The video?" The courtroom lights dimmed. A large white screen descended from a recess in the ceiling. A bailiff hit a switch. The ballroom appeared, bright and clear. The sound of the string quartet filled the hushed courtroom. Then, ting, 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 Gregory's voice, the one I had heard my entire life, boomed from the speakers, a gift from her older sister. I watched myself walk forward, a small figure in a navy dress, moving against the tide of applause. "That is a lie. I never agreed to that," my father's snarl. "You will not embarrass this family. It is mine. Not anymore." And then, the sound, the crack. In the dead, amplified silence of the courtroom. It was a violation. It was a gunshot. A woman in the jury box. A librarian I recognized from the city branch. Flinched so hard she almost dropped her pen. A man in the back row let out an involuntary, choked sound. The judge, his face a mask, just stared at the screen. No one had tried to mute the audio. The sound was the evidence. The video played on. The screams, the chaos, the close-up of my father's face, contorted with rage, and then his sudden, panicked pivot. It was an accident. She slipped. The DA clicked the remote. The image froze. The lights came up. The jury was silent, but their faces were set. They had seen the truth. The rest of the trial was just a formality, a drawing of lines to connect the dots. The DA built her case with meticulous, minimalist precision. First, the ER doctor. He was clear, factual. He presented my medical file. Laceration to the occipital bone, 7 staples, mild concussion, significant contusions to the right shoulder blade and thoracic spine, consistent with a high velocity, forced impact against a non-yielding surface, such as a stone wall. Gregory's expensive lawyer tried to cross-examine. "Doctor, you noted the smell of alcohol on my client at the hotel. Did you not?" "I was not treating your client," the doctor said, his voice flat. "But in your estimation, was this an act of drunken passion, a celebratory gesture gone wrong?" The doctor looked at him over his glasses. "In my estimation, the patient's injuries were not the result of a gesture. They were the result of a violent assault." Next, the witnesses, the young man who had live-streamed, his hands shaking slightly as he held the microphone. The hotel manager, who confirmed the authenticity of the high-definition overhead footage. The woman from the brunch who had cried. Each one confirmed the timeline. He made an announcement. She calmly refuted it. He attacked her. Then, Gregory's defense. It was exactly what Monica had predicted. It was an argument built of fog and sentiment. "This is a family tragedy," the Denver lawyer said, his voice a smooth, reasonable baritone. He paced in front of the jury. "A private, painful moment, captured and twisted by the cruel lens of social media. We are not denying Mr. Hart's involvement. We are contextualizing it." He painted a picture of a loving father, a patriarch, who'd had a celebratory drink or two. A man who was overcome with emotion and passionate generosity. A man who just lapsed for a single, regrettable moment. "This wasn't a crime," he implored. "It was a mistake, a family dispute that should have been handled at home, not in a courtroom." He tried to paint me as the villain, the cold, ungrateful daughter who, instead of handling this privately, had chosen to humiliate her family for financial gain. He should not have mentioned the finances. The DA stood up. The defense opens the door to the context of this assault. The prosecution is happy to walk through it. She called Monica Vale to the stand. Monica was not a witness. She was a weapon. She was ice and facts. The DA projected the timeline on the wall. Ms. Vale, can you identify this document? Yes, it is the deed to 47 Juniper Avenue, purchased and held solely in the name of Quinn Reyes. And this? A series of texts, authenticated by the service provider, from Olivia Hart, discussing the plan to announce the house at the wedding, specifically to force Quinn's hand and make sure she couldn't say no. Objection, the defense lawyer shouted. Hearsay. Overruled, the judge said, his voice bored. It speaks directly to the defendant's motive and premeditation. Continue. Counselor. The timeline was brutal. The loving father was a co-conspirator. The generous gift was a premeditated theft. The DA walked the jury through it, step by step. 1. The plan to seize the property. 2. The lie told to 280 people. 3. The calm, verbal no from the rightful owner. 4. The violent physical punishment for that no. 5. The 911 calls. 6. The medical report. 7. The voicemail from Diane Hart, attempting to coerce me into dropping the charges. The jury, their faces grim, took notes. They did not look at Gregory. They looked at the screen, at the timeline. A courier arrived just before the closing arguments, handing a document to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. The judge read it and passed it to the prosecution and defense. It was a letter, on heavy bond paper, from the new board of directors of Pioneer Ridge Developments. It was a formal, public disavowal of their former CEO, stating that the personal criminal actions of Mr. Gregory Hart do not represent the company. It was a late, desperate stab in the back, and the final nail. The DA's closing argument was 5 minutes long. She stood in front of the jury, the frozen image of the crack on the screen behind her. The defense says this is a family matter, that this was a lapse in judgment, but the evidence shows you something else. It shows you a conspiracy. It shows you a premeditated plan to seize property, and it shows you the violent, calculated punishment enacted when that plan failed. This wasn't a lapse. It was the plan's conclusion. He didn't just lose his temper. He lost control of his victim, and for that, he chose to punish her, publicly and brutally. That is not a family matter. That is felony assault. She sat down. The jury was out for 45 minutes. We stood when they filed back in. The air was so thick I could barely breathe. On the charge of assault in the second degree, how do you find the foreman? The man with the mustache who had closed his eyes during the video stood up. He looked directly at me. Guilty. A sound tore from my mother's throat, a low animal wail. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just let out a breath, a long, slow breath that I felt I had been holding for my entire adult life. The massive, crushing weight that had lived in my chest for decades simply dissolved. I turned and looked at my father. His expensive lawyer was patting his shoulder, looking disgusted. Gregory was no longer the giant. He was no longer the patriarch. He was a pale, shrunken old man in an ill-fitting suit. He stared at the dark wood of the table, and he slowly, finally, bowed his head. The gavel came down. We moved as a unit, Monica in front, me in the middle, Jacob behind. We pushed through the heavy wooden doors into a blinding explosion of white light, cameras, microphones, shouts. Quinn, how do you feel? What do you say to your mother? Do you have a statement? I looked straight ahead. I focused on the red exit sign at the far end of the aisle. I said nothing. We walked through the wall of noise, and it parted for us. The sentencing was 2 weeks later. The judge was stern. He cited the public nature of the attack, the clear evidence of premeditation, and the complete lack of remorse. Gregory was given his sentence, a significant custodial term, but the final act was the one that mattered most to me. The judge signed the permanent order of protection, a lifetime restraining order, barring Gregory, Diane, and Olivia Hart from ever coming within 500 feet of me or my property. It was the boundary I had tried to build, the line I had tried to draw. Now it was no longer a request. It was a fact, set in stone and filed in ink. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt light. The pressure was gone. The house and I could finally breathe. The sentence was handed down on a Tuesday. The judge, citing the overwhelming video evidence and the clear intent to both defraud and intimidate, gave Gregory a sentence that matched the severity of the crime. It was real. It was custodial. The whispers in the courtroom, the frantic energy of the press, it all just settled. The story, in the public record, was finally written in ink. The fallout for the rest of the family was not a loud explosion. It was a quiet, structural collapse. Diane sold the large family home on the hill. It went quickly. Sold through a broker to a tech family moving in from the coast. It was too large for her. The broker had said, too full of memories. A single, cream-colored envelope arrived at my house a week after the sale. My mother's elegant, familiar handwriting on the front. I opened it. It was a single page, filled with carefully chosen words. Regret for the entire situation. Sadness over the division in the family. A hope that we could all find peace. It was a masterpiece of the non-apology apology. It was a letter that mourned the consequences, not the actions. I read it once. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I felt nothing at all. I folded it and put it in a drawer in my workshop. It was just paper. Olivia left town. Jacob mentioned he had heard it through a supplier. She had moved back east. Somewhere no one knew her name. There was no farewell party. No one saw her off. She just vanished, like a performer who had missed her cue and exited to an empty stage. That night, I sat on my front porch at 47 Juniper Avenue. The sun was setting, a deep, bruised purple and gold over the mountains. The air was cool and smelled of pine. I sat on the porch swing, the one I had welded from scrap steel, and let my feet push it gently back and forth. The chains made a soft, rhythmic cree-cree. It was not a squeak of rust or decay. It was the sound of a well-designed joint, moving exactly as it was intended to. It was the quiet, steady heartbeat of a house that was sound, a house that was finally at peace. The following Saturday, I opened my front door. The living room, which Olivia had once dismissed as too brown, was full of light and motion. The first Juniper Restoration Workshop was in session. 6 students, a mix of young apprentices and older homeowners, were gathered around a salvaged 19th century window frame. "Look at the joinery," I said, running my fingers over a mortise and tenon joint. "This isn't nailed, it's locked. The person who built this, 140 years ago, intended it to last. Our job isn't to replace it. Our job is to respect it, to stabilize it, to help it continue its story." They leaned in, touching the wood, their faces full of concentration and discovery. My house, which had been my fortress, was now a school. It was breathing again, filled not with tension, but with the scent of sawdust and the sound of quiet, focused work. On the wall of my studio, the south-facing room that was perfect for a nursery, I had hung 3 things. They were in simple, black frames. The first was a single, crumpled, stain-splattered invoice for lumber. My very first purchase for the house. The second was a dark, grainy photograph I had taken on that first day, showing the collapsed roof and the waterlogged floors. The third was a clean, crisp blueprint, my own hand-drafted plan. With the title I had written in the corner block, Juniper Rises. It was my own history, my own archive of facts. Jacob stopped by that afternoon, just as the students were packing up. He brought 2 cups of coffee, and we stood at the massive butcher block island in the kitchen. He unrolled a set of fresh blueprints on the counter, his own drafting lines clean and confident. "I've been thinking," Quinn, he said, tapping the drawing. The workshops are incredible, but what if we made it permanent the ground floor? We could turn it into a community space, a rotating gallery for local artisans, a public classroom for the preservation trades. I looked at the drawing. He had reimagined my living room, not as a fortress, but as an open, welcoming, public space, a place to share the work. I walked away from the counter, coffee in hand. I went to the main staircase. The late afternoon sun was hitting the landing, pouring through the stained glass window, my window, the one I had found in pieces, the one I had spent a month re-leading, soldering the broken glass back together. The light it threw on the restored oak floor was breathtaking. It was a pool of liquid ruby, deep emerald, and brilliant cobalt. It was so vivid it looked solid, like spilled paint. It was the physical proof, the testament of the hands. It was what you could do. You could take the broken, shattered, discarded pieces, and with patience and labor, you could make them whole. You could make them throw light. I walked back to my laptop, which sat on the counter. An email was waiting. It was from Juniper Justice, the women's advocacy group. The subject line, an invitation. They were asking if I would consider joining their board of directors to help them build a new program for women rebuilding their lives. Women who, like me, needed to learn how to build their own walls. I looked at Jacob's blueprints. I looked at the light on my floor. I typed a single word in reply. Yes. I hit send. My voice, even in text, felt steady. A moment later, a soft knock came from the open front door. Mrs. Gable, my neighbor, was standing on the threshold, her hands clutching her mail. "Quinn," she said, a little hesitant. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I walk by here every day, and I just have to say, your home is the most beautiful on this street. What you did here, it's just a miracle." The old me, the shadow, would have deflected. "Oh, it was nothing. It's still a work in progress." I smiled, a real, warm smile. "Thank you, Helen. It was a lot of labor." I stepped back from the door. "Please, come in. I just made a fresh pot of coffee." She beamed and stepped inside, stepping over the threshold I had built. That night, after Jacob had gone and the house was quiet, I stood in the living room alone. I walked over to the main wall, the one by the staircase, and I pressed my hand flat against the oak planks. They were warm from the last of the sun. I could feel the solid, steady strength of the studs behind the plaster, the foundation under the floor. "Nobody can take what you've built," I whispered. It wasn't an affirmation. It wasn't a hope. It was just a statement of fact. There was one last thing to do. The final piece of the restoration. I went to my workshop and picked up my drill. I grabbed a small rectangular object from my workbench. I walked out onto the front porch. The air was cool. The sky a deep, star-filled indigo. I held the object up against the main porch beam, the one I had set myself. It was a small brass plaque, custom ordered. I drilled the 2 pilot holes. I set the 2 brass screws, and I drove them in. The drill's motor a satisfying, final whir, until they were perfectly flush. I stepped back and read the words, their simple, dark letters shining in the porch light. Juniper 47, by Quinn Reyes. It was done. My name, on my work, on my house. I put the drill down on the swing. I stood there for a long time, looking at the plaque. Then I turned. I faced the dark street, the quiet neighborhood, the world. I faced the imaginary camera that had started this all, the one that had held a steady, unblinking red light. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I just stood there, on my own porch, in front of my own house, breathing my own air. I was no longer the shadow. I was the architect. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below. Share your thoughts, and let's connect. Make sure you subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories and like this video. And if this story resonated with you, please support us by hitting that hype button so more people can hear it.